asked them, what classroom technology do you want to have in your future classroom? And every year for the last almost a decade now, overwhelmingly, they have answered with the dry erase board slash chalkboard slash LCD projector kind of being at the top of their list. And then as you can see, the other categories that come about, and this is just their brainstorming, I don't give them categories, these are the technologies that they tend to want. And when I started about a decade ago, I was kind of surprised that they didn't want things like iPods or newer technologies or software in their classroom. They were really kind of sticking with the tried and true stuff. And I found that to be really interesting. I also asked them if they wanted to have the technology with them or in the hands of their students. In other words, giving everyone kind of a one-to-one experience. Overwhelmingly, every year, the teachers say to me, oh, no, I'm really afraid of the idea of the students having the technology. I want to control all of the technology in my classroom. And this was interesting to me because, these surveys kind of started back in 2004, 2005. And what was interesting was that we were in a time where a lot of schools were developing kind of one-to-one laptop initiatives. My old high school where I taught did. But yet still new teachers were very uncomfortable with the idea of their students having the technology. And from kind of a background perspective, it shouldn't surprise us because what we know from all this teacher education research out there is that teacher beliefs really do inform practices. So all of my students go into my teaching program already having an idea of what their classroom is going to look like and the technology they want to use. And when they think of technology, they think way back to their own classroom experiences. They don't think, what could I use in the future, or what's the newest technologies? They tend to think backwards. Well, what did my fifth grade teacher have? And I just loved her, so I want to have exactly what she had. So I was well aware that we were living in a time where teacher beliefs were really kind of impeding this. Now, while I was teaching the pre-service teachers, I came across this book, Mindstorm. And what was really interesting to me in this book, it's by Seymour Papert. He's a programmer. He does a lot of coding and was written many, many years ago. But one of the things he said in this book was some of the most crucial steps in mental growth are based not simply on acquiring new skills, but on acquiring new administrative ways to use what one already knows. And so I started to think, and this was back in 2004, 2005, well, what are the technology skills that students already know, that they're already walking into our classrooms with? And what I found was that when I looked around campus, they were all, of course, what were they doing? Well, they were all using, their mobile devices, their laptops, their cell phones and such. And then I started to think about the classroom. And when the students walk in the classroom, of course, they're asked to give up their devices to their teachers. And this was back in 2004, 2005. And it resonated with me. But at the same time, I had no idea how you could use a cell phone as a learning tool. At the time, I had just come from being a tech coordinator for many years, writing policies against having cell phones in the classroom. So the idea was so foreign to me that we could flip this and actually use it in a beneficial way. But I kept it in my mind. And about maybe a few months later, I was teaching some classes at Madonna University, and most of the teachers I worked with taught in Detroit. And so I would show them all these kind of latest and greatest gadgets that cost a lot of money, tablets and smart boards and such. And they would always kind of raise their hand and say, Liz, we can't do this because we don't have any money in Detroit public schools. Our students don't have access to these kinds of things. We can't do it, so why are you teaching it to us? And then one day I was showing some teachers how to do weblogs with Blogger. And all of a sudden on the screen popped up this little icon, and it said audio blog from your cell phone. And I had never heard of audio blogging. This was back in 2004. I don't understand what this means, but I'm curious. I'm a tech person. So I called the number, and I get a message that says, speak into your phone. So I said something, and when I hung up my phone, all of a sudden this little MP3 file appeared on my screen. And it was exactly what I had said, and there it was on the blog. And I turned to the teachers, and they looked at me, and I said, oh, gosh, that's like the easiest podcast I've ever made. I mean, it had this little RSS feed. The time we were doing all these crazy things, plugging in microphones to iPods to do these kinds of things. And the teachers looked at me and said, well, Liz, my students can do that because they all have cell phones. And the other teacher said, yeah, all my kids have cell phones. They don't have computers at home. They all make sure that they save their money for those cell phones. And I realized at that moment that students can use the cell phone to do all sorts of oral learning activities. So we started brainstorming right there. What could we do? We could do oral history projects. We could work with English language learners. We could do speeches and debates, and students could call in observations. They could do interviews. We just started rattling off all of these ideas. And then what we did was teachers started trying these ideas in their classroom. So we would kind of develop a lesson plan together, and teachers like this one, Pat Sattler, who teaches at St. Joseph's School, which is in Trenton, right outside of Detroit, and they didn't have any microphones on their computers. They had really old computers, but she'd always wanted to do radio theater podcasting. So she used her cell phone, as you can see, kind of an old school Motorola Razr, and she used a resource called Hipcast, which is a great resource to record to, and she set it up so that her students would do these live radio theater broadcasts to Hipcast, and she used one cell phone, her own, for all of the third graders, fourth graders, and fifth graders, and they all got to create all these fantastic radio theater podcasts. And the students loved being able to broadcast from the phone and carry the phone around with them and actually use it for learning. So another example from excuse me, I'm getting ahead of myself. So what ended up happening from that was after we started doing some of these activities, I kept looking around for other teachers who were doing this, and I couldn't find any other teacher who was using cell phones in the classroom that was willing to try it. I couldn't find any research on it. So I wrote an article, this one right here. I wrote this article, Toy to Tool, and I sent it to ISTE in 2005. And they called me up and said, we love this article, we love this concept, hey, do you have anything else like it? And I said, actually, yes, I have, 20 or 30 lesson plans that these teachers and I have been doing in the classrooms in and around Detroit. And they said, great, can you make it into a book? And so I ended up putting together this book right down here of some of the lesson plans, the resources we were using. We were only using free resources for the most part because that's all the schools could afford. And we were using whatever cell phone the students had or the teacher had in some cases. And we created management plans. We kind of made it work. And then from that, what was really interesting was after my book came out in 2007, I started getting tweets, because I'm on Twitter, from teachers who said, oh, Liz, I picked up your book, and I'm using X lesson in my classroom, but I modified it, and I'm doing this instead with it. And I started getting lots of these emails, tweets, messages on my blog. So I started contacting these teachers saying, I'd love to hear more about what you're doing. And I began interviewing these teachers. And I ended up having about 20 teachers that I interviewed as case studies for the next book. And that book is really kind of the grassroots teachers just trying things in their classroom, using their students' own devices, not getting a big grant for a one-to-one or having to sustain anything, really just using whatever the students have and working through that. So a few samples from there, and I think this is the book that you've kind of been looking at, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But some of the samples that I really enjoyed were Allison Riccardi, who was actually a student teacher here locally in Ann Arbor, and she had an issue with a problem where her Spanish student, she was a world language teacher, just would not speak up in class. They would not put themselves out there. She's working with high school students. They're socially afraid. So only half of them had cell phones, but what she decided to do was she decided, I'm just going to try it one day. So she asked her students to bring cell phones. She made some rules and regulations around it, and she started having them text into one of the texting boards with Phoebe, I think she used. And she gave the students a sentence in English. They put it into Spanish, and then she was able to go around and correct the Spanish through the board, so it was anonymous, as you can see. And what she said she found, what was really interesting about it was she said even though only half her students had cell phones, they were passing their cell phones around so their friends could also text in their answers. And she said she found many of them were texting in multiple answers because they weren't 100% certain, so they wanted to try again. And they all ended up getting feedback, but they didn't have the social kind of ridicule from the feedback because they were anonymous. And they also felt more comfortable kind of speaking up about what they thought was correct or wrong because they could text it in rather than having to say it. So another example from there is Jimbo Lamb, who's done a lot of fantastic things with cell phones. But one of the first things that he had done was deal with an issue that often happens in his classroom, which is that issue of, Mr. Lamb, why are we learning algebra? What's the point of learning the quadratic equation? Or what's the point of having to learn this formula? So what he did was he turned to his students and he said, look, there's lots of everyday reasons why you use the quadratic formula or why you use different algebraic equations. So what I want you to do is I want you to go out in your everyday life, and when you recognize that you're using algebra, I want you to call in to this free 1-800 number we have from a resource called Yodio, is what he used. Today I probably would use like Google Voice, but this was a few years ago. And he said, call in and tell us what you're doing in the moment. Put it into the quadratic equation or formula the best you can. It's okay if it's a guess. And you can take a picture too because you can make it into like a little slideshow in Yodio. So in the end, by the end of the semester or by the end of the term, he ended up having about 25 examples from students of things they do in their everyday life that connect to mathematics. So it made it very authentic for them. Judy Peterson teaches in California, and the majority of her students, as you can see with those statistics down there, are English language learners. They are first generation Americans. Most of their parents only speak Spanish. So she's an English teacher trying to teach students who really struggle with English, things like Shakespeare. So not easy to do. And what she found one day as she was struggling with her students was that her students' preferred mode of communication was texting. That's what they did with each other. They all had some form of texting available to them for the most part. Even if they didn't have a cell phone, they may have used parent cell phones. They may have found a way to use computer texting through the library. And so she decided to kind of flip her class. And she decided instead of asking students to write down summaries of what they were reading, and they happened to be reading some Shakespearean sonnets, I guess. And she said, I want them to just start summarizing via Twitter through texting. And that's what they started to do. And so she said they only had 140 characters, but they found fantastic ways to summarize what they were reading. And it forced them to really think about what's the main point, what are the goals, what's really happening here, to put it into that 140 characters. And she's since expanded that greatly. She now uses Twitter for all forms of communication with not only her students, but her parents too, because she found she can actually do parent conferences via Twitter and private Twitter accounts with cell phones, because many of the parents would not show up because they were too intimidated to come to the classroom, especially not being able to speak the language very well. But through Twitter, they can even use the translation tools, and so she was able to really connect with them. And then one final example is Kip Rogers, and he taught at a middle school in Virginia, Passages Middle School, which has the majority of students are on free and reduced lunch. And one of his struggles also was kind of that home to school communication. So what he did was he was able, it was about 2006, 2007, maybe a little bit later than that. He was giving a standardized test to his students, and it was a math test, and they didn't have enough calculators. So he asked his students if anybody had a calculator they could use on the test. And one of his students raised his hand, and he said, oh, Mr. Rogers, I have a calculator on my phone in my locker. And Mr. Rogers said, oh, you do? How many of you have a calculator on your phone? And he said, almost all the students raised their hands. And he said, do all of you have cell phones? And he said, almost all the students raised their hand. And it was a real light bulb moment for him because he was definitely in a school district where most students didn't have any kind of broadband or internet access at home, but finding out that they did have communication via the cell phones made a huge difference. So what he did was he spent an entire summer with his classroom teachers coming up with a new acceptable use policy that would allow the students to use the cell phones in the classroom for class assignments. He also spent the summer training his teachers how to use cell phones productively, talked about management, created rules and regulations for the school. And this is really the first school that I saw that had a real structured approach to bring your own device policy. And this was way back in 2007, 2008. So now we're seeing many schools with quite a variety of policies that work pretty well. But it was very encouraging to see something like this, especially because he was able to use it not just with the students again, but parents he was able to better communicate with through their cell phones. He used a lot of things like text alerts in order to do this. And I think I heard Lisa say she sent out a Remind 101 alert. So there's a lot of great free resources like Remind 101. I love that resource. I love Selly as ways to communicate back and forth via text message. One of the resources that I truly love is Selly. And I love this one in particular, not just for kind of home to school communication, but also for projects to do in the classroom. And this is one example of a school district in Connecticut where they decided that learning doesn't need to take a vacation. In other words, their concern was between June and September, we end up having to reteach a lot of things in September because our students come back not ready for the next year. So what they decided to do was they set up a text alert of the week where every day of the week they send out a different alert to different grade levels. So, for example, if I was going into fourth grade, if I was a child going into fourth grade, myself, if I had a cell phone or an iPod I touched that got text alerts, or my parents could subscribe to the fourth grade alert. And what it does is every day it gives you a connection between third and fourth grade. So the vocabulary they start sending out at the beginning of the summer is kind of the ending of third grade. And by the late summer, it becomes more the vocabulary of fourth grade. And there's always some interesting activities to do with them. They're often kind of short and sweet. But for example, scientific facts might be, take some pictures of the different animals you see in different habitats while you are on your summer vacation. And what's even better is the school found that many, many parents and students were participating. There were kind of fun prizes and things too, I think, along the way. But what was great was there was so much data built up over time. So here we are in this data-driven world, and this is all authentic data from the students of what they're collecting. The fourth grade teachers could then walk into their classroom, and they had all this data about these students that they didn't even know yet. They knew where they vacationed for the summer. They knew how they were connecting vocabulary words with different activities that they were doing. They knew where they were in their understanding of maybe local history. So they could use that data throughout the school year. They could use the images the students had brought in. They could use the scientific facts. They could use the memories or the journal entries that they might have been blogging about if they were doing little blog entries through this. So they had all sorts of data to draw from. So text alerts are great for the basic communication, but they can also be used in this kind of project-based approach where you can send them out for homework. You can even send them out over break to do kind of longer-term studies or just keep the connection going with your students. And then, of course, another great thing that we see when it comes to cell phones are things like taking that quick advantage of Twitter like Judy Peterson did. One of my favorite projects is such a simple project to do on Twitter, which is that anybody can follow an expert on Twitter and you don't have to have a Twitter account. So Twitter officially you have to be 13 and older, pretty much as every website because of FERPA. But the nice thing is you don't have to have an account to follow people on Twitter. So, for example, if I text, @LCole, which is my Twitter feed, then every time I post something new or somebody posts something about me, I actually will get a text alert on my phone. So I don't know that fourth graders want to follow me, but they might want to follow Judy Bloom, who's on Twitter. They might want to follow Patricia Polacco, who's on Twitter. They might want to follow Kevin Henkes. They might want to follow some, great authors. They might want to follow politicians if they're studying government. They might want to follow certain scientists or local phenomenon. They can even follow hashtags this way. So it's a great project for students to do, for parents to get involved with their children, and have the parents doing the following, especially if it's with younger kids. So then again, looking at, some other just basic things with text messaging and text alerts. Here we have a situation where students, ninth graders, who might be struggling with understanding literacy. In this case, it was Romeo and Juliet, but in reality, it can be any kind of literacy that you're working with. Poetry, it can be authors who write with very sophisticated language, like maybe Toni Morrison. So you can ask the students, instead of kind of summarizing by almost transcribing word for word what they read, making them kind of twist it and turn it into something like 140 characters, or asking them to use something like TextSpeak so that they can feel more comfortable with what the teacher is, or what the topics are within the language. So Romeo and Juliet is about teenagers, but a lot of teenagers struggle with reading it. So asking teenagers to change the voice into something more they're more comfortable with, like TextSpeak, can also simply just change how they understand what they're reading. So another example of a texting project, or a project using cell phones, but this time using voice, is the Murmur project. And this is kind of one iteration of what you can do with using just simple recordings through voice to the internet. So the Murmur project is based around the concept that understanding history and getting historical interviews happens best when that person can be in the place where the particular event occurred, rather than having to try to recreate it in your mind sitting in a room with a tape recorder. So the Murmur project is done in Canada, and it has people in an area of Canada, and it's where all these little red dots are. They actually walk through where the event occurred, and then they record their observation of the particular event or their memory of the event that happened in that location. So this one is capturing local history and getting people who had experiences with the local history capture that event by walking through the different place in Fort York in Canada. And they did this by using a recording place online, like a Hipcast or a Google Voice, where you can simply get a phone number and just record and walk and talk through your phone. So one other thing, just briefly, and I think, quick response codes, QR codes, barcodes, 2D codes have become extremely popular over the last couple of years. It's taken a while. I feel like they've been around for about a decade, but it's just taken the last couple of years where people have more smartphones, so they're able to take pictures of these QR codes, and they're able to actually really enact them in the classroom. So what I wanted to share with you is a video of a school from a couple of years ago, but it's still very relevant, of a school that is actually doing this pretty well in their school and integrating the QR codes in their high school. So I'm going to paste the link here in the chat room to the video, and if you can go out and watch it, and then when you are all done, just give me a green check so we know that you're all done, and you can type in your observations in the chat room as well.
Welcome to McGuffey School District. This video will illustrate how we are using QR codes to provide mobile learning opportunities for our students.
I bet you've been wondering what all the posters in the hall mean. Our project is called Mobile Zebra. McGuffey will use QR codes in an educational setting. A barcode can only be read horizontally, which means it can only hold so much data. A QR code can be read horizontally and vertically, which means it can hold much more data. Take a picture of the QR code and you will be connected to videos, audio, pictures, or websites.
We started our project in the school library where students in the reading classes developed podcasts on accelerated reader books. Allison then converted those podcasts to QR codes and added a QR card in the back of the book. Students can now choose a book in the library, take it to our special QR code station, and listen to a student-created podcast review of the book.
Our world language teacher develops audio versions of vocabulary for students to review pronunciations. She added a QR code in the corner of her worksheets so students could listen and practice while on the move. The social studies teachers add QR codes on their worksheets that analyze battles. The QR code links students to reenactments on YouTube so they may better visualize the battle. Because science labs may not be repeatable for students who are absent, our science teachers record the science labs and put QR codes of the videos on a designated calendar. This helps students who missed the lab because they can now take it home on their phone. Students in the Family and Consumer Science classes conduct cooking demonstrations. This year, the demonstrations are recorded and uploaded online. The student recipes include a QR code that links to the recorded video. Students in music classes are able to practice their parts at home because a QR code on their music links to audio of their individual part. QR codes are located all around the school campus, even on trees. Our vocational agriculture students can break into small groups during a lesson because the audio is segmented according to a particular tree.
QR codes in our school district have extended learning opportunities, provided remediation, and connected our student community beyond the school walls.
So it looks like just about everybody is finishing, and I know Mary said that she might not be able to do everything. So Lauren, isn't that a great example? Really good examples of how you can use QR codes in a variety of different subject areas in different ways. One of my favorites are the science experiments, because that is problematic. When you miss lab time, then the teacher has to spend a lot of time making that up with you. And if you can make it simple with the QR codes and connect it with the video, it just makes it so much easier. So I think as we get better and better with QR codes, and as more and more students have devices that can read them, everyone from most students now have either an iPod iTouch or a cell phone of some sort. And we're getting very close to that, which is exciting. And I want to share with you one of my favorite resources for QR codes. On my blog, I have a lot of them, but this is one of my personal favorites that I want to share, and I use this one a lot in my own teaching. This one is called Poll2Go, and I'm going to screen share it. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and screen share that over. Hopefully that'll work. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen. Okay. Okay, good. Green check, I like to see that. So this is Poll to Go, and it's a free resource up to a certain number of responses, but I've always been able to kind of work around that, which is nice. So it's a place where you can go to, you can create a poll, and this creates QR code polls, I should say. So I can ask any question I want. What is your favorite Web 2.0 site to use? And then I can make it multiple choice, so I could give choices. I could make it just general feedback that someone could just text in any idea. I could have it set up as kind of almost like a rating system. Do yes, no, they have question grabber, so lots of choices in there. I can also choose how long I want the poll to go for. We'll just have ours go for 8 hours. You can choose languages as well, and you can have it even password protected if there's any information in there that needs to be secure. You can have hashtags, lots of choices with the polls. You can hide results from the participants. You can show them the results. You can also request you get the information from the person who's giving you the results. And also you can even have it findable by geographic location where the results are coming from, which would be really fun for a class project, like a Where's Waldo kind of thing. And then I can choose when I want to be notified. And then I can create the poll. And then notice right here what it's done is it gives me a link. It gives me a short, kind of a tiny URL link that we can use for anybody who has mobile web. They can get it that way. Or they also give me the small and large QR code that I can use. So I can copy and paste that. I can print it. I can see if I can take a picture of this right now. Put it on the screen so that you could take, if you on your phones right now, if you had a QR code reader, you could go ahead and read that and then take the poll. And then all the polls show up in real time, live feed. So as the results would come in, I don't want to add more credits. That's good. We can watch those results. So let me show you how we do that. So if I go back to my general Poll to Go account, I can go to View Poll Results. And I can select the poll. As you can see, I use many of them. And then I can view that poll. Nobody's done anything with it yet. But if there were results, we could see them. And then let's view a different poll result. So there we go. So this is a poll result. You can see it was a true-false poll. You can see the results. As they come in, you would see the changes on there, just kind of like a poll everywhere type of thing. And then also in here, it also shows most frequently used words. So if you added comments, then it also shows you which words come out the most. So this doesn't work quite as well for this true-false question, but if I had a question about if I had students summarizing something, then it would be interesting to see what words they use most frequently and something like that. So, and you can go back and edit the polls and change them. So I use it sometimes as kind of a getting started. Students will just take a picture of the poll really quick and use it to get started. Oh, Lauren, I'm sorry. I'm not sure what happened with the screen there. So it is a good tool. So you can go back and kind of take a look at it. That's one of my personal favorites with the QR codes. But like I said, my website has a lot of other ones on it. And then this is just a really fun idea that you can use with the Poll to Go. So you can make a bunch of polls, and if you're going on a class field trip of some sort, you can put the polls all, oh, you were, Lisa. Okay, let me go back and see the results. Let's see. Let's use those results first. Oh, yes. Good choice. Okay, let me share that. Okay, I'm sharing now. So you can see Lisa responded with her favorite result there. We can even do a map analysis of where she's at. I don't know if that's correct or not.
Yeah, it's close.
Does that look correct, Lisa?
Close.
Close enough. Okay, so close enough. There we go. Let's switch to the whiteboard. There we go. So this idea I really love, just making a bunch of kind of surveys and polls and responses if you're going on a field trip, and then posting your QR codes around the museum, or this teacher did it around the zoo. And then if you're with younger kids, having the parents, use the cell phones with the students and help them answer the questions or participate. What's great is you can see the poll results through your phone too. So even though you might not be with every group of students, you still are able to see the results as they come in. And you could even use something like Selly or Remind 101 to kind of text back individual students and such, and do those kinds of activities. So that's just kind of one example of many that you can do with the QR codes. But very exciting with them, and we just see them more and more, which I think is fantastic, and they're so easy to create that I think it makes it very friendly for the teachers in general. So that's kind of a quick summary of where I was coming from and how I ended up putting together the book, and just some snippets of things that I've talked about in the book, and now we're kind of even moving beyond that. And my website, I talk a lot more about different resources specifically that are great to use with cell phones, and I mentioned some apps too as well if you're into doing that with smartphones and iPads and iTouches and such like that. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody has any questions they want to ask, and I'll do my best to answer them. All right, Carlos has a question. Carlos, I'll take myself off the mic if you want to use it.
First of all, thank you. I really appreciate you sharing all this information, and your knowledge is very helpful. I work at a community college here in Raleigh, North Carolina, and one of my questions is, how do you address when instructors say mobile devices are a distraction or students use them to cheat? I often hear that from instructors and really don't know what to say sometimes.
Great question, and I hear this a lot. So there's a couple of things. Number one, I definitely try to reinforce the fact that students are going to cheat whether they have a mobile device or not. If they're going to cheat, they'll find a way to cheat. So in some cases, a mobile device might make it a little bit easier for them to cheat, but they're still going to find a way to cheat, because we were still cheating when we had paper and pencil and that's all we had, and we were writing notes on our arms and legs and baseball caps. So we're still going to find a way to do it. The second issue with that is it's really about creating rules and structures in your classroom and having your students buy into that. So in other words, creating a social contract with your students that you're working with and saying, we're going to bring in your own devices and we need to have some rules and structures around it. And what are some rules that would be smart to create? And talk through it with the students and come up with 5 rules that would work really well, as well as consequences. So, for example, my favorite rule, which cuts down on a lot of cheating issues, my absolute favorite rule is the one that says, bring your cell phone every day and turn it off and put it in the upper right-hand corner of your desk and have it turned over so they can't see the screen. So what that does is, from a teacher's perspective, I can eyeball the room really quickly and see who doesn't have a cell phone on their desk and see whose cell phone is not turned over and such. And I can quickly say, Carlos, how come you don't have your cell phone on your desk? And you might say, oh, I forgot it today. Or you might say, oh, sorry, I forgot to put it up there. But the bottom line is it's really hard to be using your mobile device to cheat or to text your friend or to be distracted if you can't physically use it without the teacher seeing it easily. So I can see if you grab it off of your desk, because I can look around and say it's not there. So that is one of the big benefits of actually bringing it into the classroom, is that you get to create the rules and structures around it, rather than students hiding it in their pants pocket because they're not supposed to have it anyways. And what you'll find in some of the cases in my book is many of the instructors said once we actually brought it in the classroom, the cheating went down exponentially and the distractions went down exponentially, because I could create these rules and structures around use, and I could explain to them about things like digital footprints and the fact that what they're doing is archived. So if I really wanted to find out if they're cheating, I probably could find out if they're cheating. They can also sign something that says that you have a right to ask their parent to look at the cell phone text messages or look at the information in it to see what happened during your class time and if they were using it inappropriately. Things like that tend to make them a little bit more nervous about using it in the classroom, because they know that you are paying attention and that there are consequences. So there's not a foolproof plan, and I've never heard of one, but I have talked with students who have participated in the social contract, and they have often said, I actually don't really use it to cheat as much, or I don't use it to be as distracted, because I feel like there's buy-in now. Like, I helped create these rules, so I need to abide by them, and I'm also really aware that the teacher stands by the consequences. So they will take away my device, or they won't let me use my device anymore for the class assignments, and I prefer to do that, so I don't want to lose that privilege. So just making it very, very clear. So I hope that helps at least a little bit. Statistically, if it helps, there are some great statistics from the Project Tomorrow Speak Up. If you search them, they have these fantastic statistics about the fact that kids are more likely to cheat. Students are more likely to cheat with cell phones when they're in schools that have rules against having them in schools, versus schools that allow them to be in the classroom and they have rules and structures in using them. So it's much more likely to find a student cheating using a cell phone when they're not supposed to even have it in school than in the school that welcomes the cell phones. And of course, and I think it was in the chat room, but it went by pretty quick, one of the big pieces is you might want to think about changing how you assess. Because the bottom line is that we're living in a world where it's not so much about memorizing the information as it is about knowing where to go to piece together the information. So assessing my students on a multiple choice test might not necessarily be the best way. Instead, I might want to think about they have to put together some kind of research project where there is no one answer, and every research study should be unique. So the students can't really cheat with each other, but they could collaborate with each other, and they might know how to use their mobile devices to do that, and maybe that would be okay. All right. Let me see. I see there was Mary had a question. What roles do you see for mobile devices, if any, for virtual classrooms, including higher ed? Great question. So all the classes I teach are virtual and blended. So very familiar environment to me. I think they have a very strong role. As a matter of fact, the fact that we have this great mobile revolution allows school learning to open up 24/7. So what it allows is virtual teachers and blended teachers to take full advantage of things like the text alerts. That's what I use the most often, like Stelly and Remind 101, where I send out all sorts of assignments that way. I will randomly send them messages. Hey, I know it's spring break, but if you can collect some data on X, then go ahead and do it and just text it back to me. I also see it as a great way to get to know your students by doing text messaging. Sometimes you might not have all the time in the world to call every student, but you can definitely use the text messaging features to get to know them. Like, I can send a mass text message out to all my students through Stelly, and they can individually text me back. Or we can actually have a group conversation, just kind of some get-to-know-yous at the beginning of the year. I've also used it as a virtual salon so that we have students take on different roles of historical figures or characters in a novel, and they can be anywhere. So maybe they're not all logging into the virtual room because they don't all have access at the same moment, but we can simply log onto our mobile devices or use the texting in our mobile devices, and we can start a kind of group thread in conversation. And what I love is it's all archived in Selly, so that when we do kind of get back to the larger, synchronous class, we can actually look through the thread and we can really analyze the discussion that happened and the discourse that occurred. And, it's archived, so we have this nice kind of running record of what's happening. So the text builders are really big for virtual. I also see in just a few years, places like Illuminate that we're using now, or the Blackboard Collaborate, they're making all these great mobile apps. So we should be able to do this class through your cell phone, through your iPad, through any of your mobile devices, not just a couple of them. So you won't need to be sitting at a computer anymore to do the virtual classes. And finally, it's a great way to personalize learning, because by being able to get to know your students, you can also send them to places that are personal to their interests, that are personal to where they are developmentally, just through a quick text message or through a mobile app, rather than having to have everybody on the same page. There's also many resources that allow students to kind of grow with time. For example, some of the gamification stuff that's out there allows students to be at different levels, and you get all the data, and you can do all of that through your mobile devices. So I think the idea of personalized learning experience for K-12 students in virtual settings is going to become much more of a selling point for a virtual school. And any other questions? These were great questions. Carlos, I'll let you take the mic.
When it comes to mobile learning and cell phone use, what do you feel is the next big thing, and what research needs to be continued when it comes to, mobile learning? I'm at a point now where I'm trying to narrow down what exactly I want to study in mobile learning. So just wanted to get your feedback and what you think might need to continue to be researched when it comes to mobile learning.
Wow, this might take all day, because there's so much that we just haven't uncovered. What I would be interested in studying, and maybe you would be interested in looking at it, we do have all of these, we have a lot of schools that are focusing on a kind of a one-to-one approach, where they're purchasing, smartphones of some sort for all of their students. And then we have other schools that are focusing on the bring your own device. I think it would be very interesting to compare these schools and to see, as far as the outcomes of where the students are at with their, one, kind of engagement and enthusiasm for learning, two, how much they're using the device at home and in the classroom, how much the teachers are taking advantage of these devices. I think it would be a very interesting comparison, because one of the areas that we tend to have a lot of discourse around is, should we do a one-to-one uniform integration? Should we do a bring your own approach? Neither is perfect. So I think a comparison study would be really, really interesting. If you can find two schools and similar demographics and kind of do some kind of comparison. I also think this concept of using mobile devices for personalizing learning is very cutting edge. And I don't see anybody looking at that right now. And I think the concept of being able to have a teacher who is using mobile apps and different features of the phones to send these personal learning journeys to students is very intriguing to me. And it kind of gets back to the question about the higher ed question a little bit. I do also think another kind of interesting piece to study is on all of these apps that are coming out that are being used, especially in early elementary for literacy. I think it would be interesting to see what kind of effect these apps have on literacy and language learning, because we hear a lot of people saying they're great in the classroom, a lot of kind of teacher research in the classroom, but we're just not really, the anecdotal evidence is there, but the actual research base is not there. So I think those are all areas where people would be very interested in learning about more.
I think TJ had a question for you that was more personal. That was like, what's next for you personally?
Oh, thanks for asking that, TJ. So I am, a big, huge piece of my focus right now, and I'm spending a lot of time and energy, is not quite as much in specifically the mobile cell phone world, but it is in the bring your own technology and bring your own device world. So I have been focusing a lot on getting my teachers ready to use everyday video games in the classroom, as well as students' own cell phones. So that's been a big piece of my journey right now. We're doing, I have teachers who are researching their students' interest in everyday video gaming, and then taking that interest, such as using like Minecraft or the Nintendo Wii or Words with Friends or something along those lines, and figuring out if there's a way to bring it into the classroom learning experience that can kind of enhance, engage, extend their curriculum learning in different ways. So that is what I've been focusing on.
Well, folks.
Any other questions?
I guess there's one more question there about a book plan.
Right now, I don't think there's a book plan. I might write a few articles about it. It's actually been fantastic so far. So if I had time, maybe I would put a book together about it. But I don't know at the moment. It just kind of depends on where it ends up going. So I'm too much in the middle of it to think about a book yet. But I will let everyone know if that does happen. So thank you for asking.
All right, well, so unless there's any other burning questions, let's give Liz a virtual round of applause, if you will. And it does look like there's some more questions. So Gina, go ahead and take the mic if you'd like. It looks like she's typing her question in. Ellen, you did not have a question. You must have just accidentally hit that. No problems. Did anybody else have any other last minute questions for Liz? Huh. No worries, Ellen. We're so tired right now. Well, again, a virtual thank you. Give her that virtual round of applause. And again, thank you so much for your time. And of course, you can follow her on Twitter, and she has her blog. And we are just so appreciative of you being here. Thank you so very much.
Well, thank you, everyone. It was fun talking to all of you, and good luck with the rest of the semester, the term. I'm not sure where you're at, but good luck with it. And hopefully I will see you in my professional learning network.
Thanks again, Liz. Awesome as usual. Thank you so very much. Really appreciate it.